Okay, so everyone, thank you for coming. As you know, Antonia is here to have a very sexy talk for us. And I'm going to go ahead and let her introduce herself. We're all very excited, and then maybe we could go around the table and introduce ourselves. I'll just speak for myself. I don't know everyone. I'm really looking forward to get to meeting everyone. Maybe just a little tidbit about yourself would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
So hello everybody, my name is Antonia Barradas. I'm a lawyer and I have a Master in Human Rights, and I've been a visiting scholar for the last few months here at the Center for the Study of Men and Masculinities. I'm doing a PhD in sociology and law, so this presentation is going to be sociological and legal. I'm going to try to sort of make it twofold as much as it's possible within the law to look at the sociological aspects of it. So it would be really nice to know a little bit about every one of you, a little bit about your background, so I know what kind of backgrounds you have. Who wants to start?
Sure. I'm Stephanie. I'm currently doing a master's program in medical humanities, and I plan on going to medical school, and I'm taking sociology courses incorporated into my electives for that program.
I'm Emily. I'm in my last year of undergrad studying sociology and humanitarian studies.
I am Muhammad Ali. I'm again a visiting scholar at the center for this 1 year. It's been about 6 or 7 months. I'll be here for a few more months.
I'm Linda Wicks. I teach sociology of gender in the sociology department. It's cross-listed with women's studies. I've taught it, I don't know, many times. It's never boring.
I'm Anna. I'm also a visiting scholar here from Poland, and I'm doing research in transgender studies.
I'm Robert. I'm a fourth-year grad student here at the department. My research interests are sexualities, globalization, and technology.
And I'm Susie. I'm a graduate student in this department and also program director for the center. And I study HIV behaviors and inequalities in access to care. So very medical sociology-ish.
Well, thank you. So I'm going to start, this is my dissertation topic, actually. So this is a work in progress. I've been researching for it. This is why I came to the United States, because, of course, the United States has a lot of interesting case law on pornography as well. So, but my focus will be pornography in the European Union, because I'm from Portugal. So I also started looking at the EU laws around different countries, not only in Portugal, but also around the world. I look at it from a human rights perspective as well. And the sociology part is very important, because we need to look at everything that's going on nowadays that is actually changing the face of what pornography actually is. So I also include the relation between the need to engage men in gender equality. I just wanted to start with this little postcard. This is what pornography used to look like. It's from the UK. It says it's lovely when we go up and down quickly. And I put it here because the UK is in the process of leaving the European Union, as you know. So I thought it was an interesting way to start to show you a very old, let's say an old-fashioned form of depicting something that's related to sex. So the objectives of this seminar from a legal perspective, I'm going to go through these three different aspects. So we're going to look at pornography laws around the world. We're going to look at the scope of international human rights instruments and the scope of European Union legal instruments. And from a sociological perspective, my idea is to go through these different areas or realms of life, let's say. So the college scenario, work, pop culture, youth, politics, and ethics. I'm going to try to go through this as briefly as possible to give you more time to ask questions and so we can debate and talk about these things that we're going to go through. So basically, I wanted to start with the definition of pornography. Really, I take it from Andrea Dworkin. She uses pornography as the ancient Greek, so she defines it's porne, which is the word, and graphos. So porne means whore, and graphos means writing. So Andrea Dworkin, in particular, uses this term and considers the meaning of it to be writing about whores. So these were women in brothels, but they weren't just any kind of woman. They were the lowest class of prostitutes, according to Andrea Dworkin. They were in the brothels. They were the cheapest and the most unprotected of all women. So they were, including slaves, at the time considered what they call vile whores. So pornography did not mean to write about sex necessarily or depicting erotic or sexual acts, but rather was equivalent to the graphic depiction of women as vile whores, and not prostitutes. So not all prostitutes were considered vile. So there's this sort of distinction between the concept of pornography. Then you have three different authors that talk about definitions of pornography. There's the graphic sexually explicit material. There's also, this author in particular, Robert Jensen, does the triangle, so the buyer, the seller, and what is being bought or sold, and actually makes a very specific relation between the idea of the purchase and sale of pornography and the idea of the purchase sale of sex itself, of sex work, of prostitution. So, and then Michael Flood, who's also an author that I'll be referring back to, defines pornography as sexually explicit media, primarily intended to sexually arouse the audience, or as sexually explicit materials which shows genitals and sexual activities in unconcealed ways. So I just wanted you to compare like these different possible definitions of pornography. So as for laws around the world, I think this is really interesting. You can see the white areas have no data. The pink areas are where pornography is legal. The deep kind of purple area is where there are some restrictions, and the red, like reddy areas where it's illegal. So going in more specifically to from that map, you have countries that ban pornography. So Saudi Arabia, Iran, Syria, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Kenya, Cuba, and China. These are just some examples. We also, on the other hand, have the examples of the top 10 producers, let's say, of porn videos in the world. These are references I got from a UN session from an NGO that spoke about this issue. So these are very interesting, and I also have the definition from Robert Jensen that actually says how much, as far as revenue goes in the USA, the porn industry has an annual profit of more than $10 billion, which is more than the $9.5 million of Hollywood revenue. So you can see that the top 10 are USA, Brazil, Netherlands, Spain, Japan, Russia, Germany, United Kingdom, according to this reference in specific. And then there are others, and many European countries, as you can see, Portugal also being on that list of other countries that also produce it. So specific country examples and what happens in the law in these countries. So Canada generally bans the production and distribution of child pornography, and here I would like to explain to you that I'm going to use the terms child pornography and adult pornography because these are the terms that are used in the law. I don't agree with the concept of the name of child pornography or child prostitution. Pornography and prostitution are involve consent. So I'm going to look into these two concepts and try to deconstruct them somehow, because I believe using them in the law in this way also normalizes something that is not necessarily that shouldn't be normalized. So there is no such thing as a child prostitute for me, or child pornography. Even though these are the names that are used in the law, so I'll be using them. I'd just like you to know that what we're talking about is, in general, let's say adult pornography and pornography that has let's say, the heterosexual pornography, even though we will refer to same-sex pornography in some moments, but we're talking about the general adult heterosexual pornography, as Robert Jensen referred in one of his definitions. It's usually purchased by heterosexual men that usually purchase things that they want to look at women, let's say. So there's all these different countries. The USA has this ban on a federal and state level on child pornography and obscene material. Japan has a complete ban on the distribution inside, but you can actually export it, which I found it extremely interesting, that you can ban it sort of inside, but it's okay to export it. And Germany has this classification list which is of publications which may harm children. So they include pornography and all this more general concept of things that may harm children. So they include violence, pornography. They use the word immoral, so the word immoral appears many times, and this is also a very contentious issue. What is immoral? What is obscene? But this exists in the law. Also, they talk about they encourage the use of drugs. So there are all these different issues that they look into. On an EU level, so the countries of the European Union, the most unanimous legal ban is on child pornography, picture simulations, photos, and even animated material. General concepts such as obscenity, sound morals do get thrown around, so there is a lot of reference to morality and immorality. Violent pornography and zoophilia are widely prohibited. So the violent pornography includes material which involves non-consenting adults, and here we go back to the idea of consent and how important this is for the concept of what is pornography. Incitement to racial hatred, to violence, is completely prohibited in a great number of EU countries, not all of them, and there are more or less tight definitions of what is prohibited. It's mostly not an offense to possess it. There's the exception of supplying or intending to supply it to other people. Okay, so we're going into the more complex part that I'm going to try and be as simple as possible with sort of the connection of these resolutions in the European Union. Resolutions usually come after there's a report, for example, from the European Union. There's a report of a specialist group or a committee that usually is a like the first step before the resolution itself. So we're going to talk about specifically a 2014 resolution on sexual exploitation and prostitution. But I would like to look at 2 or 3 before that actually happened in 2014 to contextualize you a bit about the movement of the EU and how these countries are getting together to talk about these different aspects. So this one is about marketing and advertising. And so they say, this reinforces stereotypes, and also, so in the case of sexual services, it is also readily available to children. They eliminate, they believe in the elimination from the internet and these new technologies, certain messages that portray gender stereotypes. So that basically they want to ensure non-discrimination in marketing and advertising. And again, no incitement to hatred based on sex, racial, ethnic origin, religion, belief, disability, age, sexual orientation, and no material which glamorizes violence against women. So this kind of develops over time. Oh, don't know what happened, sorry. 2012 has another one, more general, about equality between women and men. So combat stereotypes again, gender roles, and then again the female image in a way that respects women's dignity with respect. But then there's a counterbalance, which is also very relevant here for the United States, which is the counterbalance with freedom of expression. So, and the freedom of the press in general. So there's also mentioned here, I think for the first time I found it, something that counterbalances these two aspects. Okay, so this is what I mentioned when we advertised the seminar. There's this report that produced a resolution, and this report, it's on the Committee on Women's Rights, from the Committee on Women's Rights and Gender Equality, and it basically says there's a need to research the links between, again, child and adult pornography. So adult pornography is now mentioned specifically. How it impacts girls, women, boys, and men, which is something I think needs to be pointed out, and the relationship between pornography and sexual violence. So, and also they call for a ban on all forms of pornography. So, and especially in the media, but they also mention advertising of sex tourism. And we're going to go into also a little bit into sex tourism because this is all related in the resolutions. They also ask for compilation of data, ask for a mandate to impose sanctions on companies that promote the sexualization of girls. And then some of the conclusions of this report, which I thought was very interesting, were actually left out from the resolution. This often happens because of negotiation and the things that go on with the final outcome that normally don't get into the final text. Okay, so this is let's say the main resolution we're going to look at. This is the report before the resolution. So there's a 2014 report on sexual exploitation and prostitution and its impact on gender equality, and a 2014 resolution that results from that report. That resolution basically builds up on this chronology of all these different elements. So not only other resolutions, but also conventions, so things from the UN, all different kinds of documents and input campaigns, and we're going to look a little bit through it as swiftly as possible so we can get onto the sociology part. So I want to hear, obviously, your input on the sociological aspects of this. So what they say basically is that there are negative effects that need to be fought against, particularly on online mass media production and pornography, and creating the unfavorable image of women. And that may have the effect of encouraging, and I like this expression, I'd never seen this before, the human personality of women to be disregarded and of presenting them as a commodity. So this is the idea. So they also say something that I think is, I don't know, it sounded quite old-fashioned, but I think it's up to date. So sexual liberty must not be interpreted as a license to disregard women. So this was in 2014, so it's quite recent. So then the resolution that came out of that report, let's say, well, they're related to that report because there are a lot of different contributions. They took only 2 paragraphs from that report on pornography, and then they went to all these regional instruments and elements that build up to their actual resolution. This one I think is actually probably the most interesting one of all the ones that go through this history. This is a Commission Green Paper, European Commission Green Paper. It's actually on the protection of minors and human dignity in technology, so audiovisual and information services. But what I think is interesting is they say very specifically and categorically, like, let's distinguish child pornography, which is illegal and subject to penal sanctions, versus children accessing the pornographic content for adults. So there's it's harmful for the development of children, but it may not be illegal for adults. So sometimes people confuse all these concepts. So yeah, the access of youth to pornography, I'm going to go also more into that at the end of the sociology part. But basically, this is the idea. The access to certain types of material may be subject to a general ban. And what I think is interesting is regardless of the age of the audience or how it is shown. So there's a more broad perspective here. And then there's this, they define this general category of material that violates human dignity. And in here they include, again, extreme violence, incitement to racial hatred, discrimination. And it also says irrespective of different laws on a national level. So this is the efforts of the European Union to try to make it more uniform and kind of go forward together in this different in these different areas. So basically, they do state categorically that all these types of material are available on the internet and that websites are identifiable. And then they say it's almost impossible to see these materials inadvertently. I think here they're talking about adults, obviously, because children inadvertently and young people do stumble on these things on the internet, and it is inadvertently many times, but I think probably they're referring to adults. So these new services make it more visible, make it more accessible, and they want to understand how these services really operate to get the best response to tackle certain problems. And of course they speak about the physical and mental development of children, how they can be affected by accessing these pornographic materials. Which are only allowed for adults. So we have this issue that I'm also going to try to approach. 1997 seems to have been a year where there was a lot of things mentioned on pornography. Some years are just better than others. So there's talk here of this EU-wide campaign, which I was referring to, of zero tolerance of violence against women. It's quite a famous campaign in Europe. It's repeated. It happens, it's sort of an ongoing thing. They talk about the work that's needed to study the impact of pornography and prostitution, and I think the connection between the two is constantly made in these resolutions. And it's their impact on men's violence against women, so relating it now to men's violence against women particularly, and the need to take action against people that are portraying violence, and coercion, and again they say in connection with prostitution and pornography. So they start talking about these two things together. I think this sort of follows in this line of things, basically the illegal use of technical possibilities of the internet, the particular protection needed for children. Again, child sex tourism more specifically, the need to fight it. But again, within the realm of child sex tourism, they speak about these international measures that they think they need to fight this situation. They connect child sex tourism with prostitution and trafficking. So again, this triangle appears. There's this connection with, obviously, with the internet that makes the child sex tourism increase. Fight abusive sex tourism, and they state, obviously, that it's very hard to monitor the internet, and this is a major factor contributing to these crimes. So the distribution of child pornography free of charge, and the easy availability of this information of sex tourism destinations. Again, trafficking of women in sexual exploitation, trafficking of women related, even if indirectly, to pornography and child pornography. So they're distinguishing the two. When they refer just to pornography, they're referring to adult pornography. Again, also, this I think can also be related to pornography, which is the vulnerability, poverty, and marginalization with which women are subject to in their countries of origin. So they connect this, the trafficking, the pornography, and the prostitution. High profits and low risks for the traffickers, and the demand for women for prostitution and other forms of exploitation in Europe is also an object of consideration. So basically 1997 was really proficuous in things that referred to pornography in this kind of area. There was a member of the European Parliament, MEP, that basically proposed here, and I thought this was interesting, back in 1997, an incorporation of a V-chip on your television that sets to block programs containing pornography or violence. So this was way back. If you think of the advances of the digital age, it's quite a long time ago. So again, in 2000 we had several resolutions. They talk, again, fighting sex tourism, children, child pornography. This I thought was particularly interesting. This resolution on the standards and action regarding crime victims in the European Union, they talk about rape, sexual exploitation, abuse of women. They need to be regarded as crimes, whether they're in the EU or not. So these kind of things need to be stated, even though they're obvious, but they need to be stated. And so the Brussels Declaration, on the other hand, asks for the ratification of these international conventions on the Committee on the Rights of the Child, so all these different instruments. In 2002, they defined what particularly vulnerable would mean for a victim, in this case talking about trafficking in human beings. But I think the definition of particularly vulnerable is important in this seminar. It says a victim under age of sexual majority under national law, and the offense has been committed for the purpose of exploitation, prostitution, or other forms of sexual exploitation, including pornography. So they always put it, they're beginning to put it more and more in these conventions. Again, the reference to young adults. Before we were just saying children, and now we're beginning to see young adults. So young adults are also vulnerable to in this development stage that begin to be, so talking about trafficking, prostitution, and pornography. In 2006, there are also several different resolutions that spoke about, again, pornography and child pornography together. What I think is probably more interesting is this last one, which I've never seen, particularly sort of this positive role that the media can have in sports events to fight certain issues that related to violence against women. Again, calls to ratify these the Convention on Rights of the Child, the optional protocols. So there are different kinds of things states are called upon to, and there's an incentive for them to do this, European Union states. Again, 2009, 2011, 2012, 2013, there's all this evolution. In 2011, there's a policy framework that says advertising and pornography frequently show gender-based violence. So there's this major strategy towards the eradication of trafficking. Then a resolution also to fight against child pornography. And I don't know if you know, Europol is the European police force. So they involve the European police force in tackling this organized crime aspect of trafficking, money laundering. So they kind of evolve in this direction. Okay, so now for international human rights instruments, we're going to a bit more of a kind of broad perspective. We looked at the EU from a regional perspective. There are these different human rights instruments. So there are the CEDAW, of course, that you probably all know. They talk about eliminating gender stereotypes, or gender roles. Again, the UN Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women talk about social patterns of the conduct of men and women and try to eradicate certain customary practices. So they're a bit general, but they're also important because they refer to at certain moments, and this one in particular, this optional protocol on the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is on the, specifically on the sale of children, child prostitution, child pornography, refers that you should have a holistic approach to child pornography. So looking at dysfunctional families, the lack of economic and equality, lack of education, gender discrimination, and irresponsible sexual behavior on the part of adults. So I think this is an interesting standpoint to sort of make the connection between children and youth and adults. So all these things, people when they're children, they take on to their adult life. So if they exist, you know, they can't just be eliminated by the fact that you've become 18 or 21 in this case. In different countries, there are different majority ages. The Palermo Protocol is super famous. It's on the trafficking of persons, and it speaks about sexual exploitation. So prostitution and other forms of sexual exploitation that can also be included in pornography. I'll explain why. There's a special rapporteur that actually writes about this specifically on trafficking in persons. Then there's these, again, this ministerial resolution, which is a slightly different body, let's say, but also asking people to ratify. And particularly, I thought this was very interesting. The World Health Organization, so on a more universal level, did this report of violence in health in 2002, where they actually say that that one of the factors that can lead to rape is access to pornography. So some of the risk factors of sexual violence against women. And they say that sexually violent men have coercive sexual fantasies, which are generally encouraged by the access to pornography, and they're believed to differ from other men in terms of impulsive behavior and antisocial tendencies. So this is more, a health care aspect of this, but I think the interesting part for masculinity is they tend to have an exaggerated sense of masculinity. So there's, I was mentioning before, two special rapporteurs that basically show the difference in spectrums that we have here. On one hand, we have the special rapporteur on the human rights of the victims of trafficking in persons. Her name is Sigma Huda. She spoke about the specified porn, what pornography would be in more detail, but she speaks about digitally created pornography, and she considers it to foster sexual exploitation. And she even goes further to say, even when actual people are not used to make the images. And we had spoken before in the seminar I started saying that, in fact, anime and other forms of depiction of people can also be included in some definitions of pornography. She also makes several references to child pornography. Again, she says there's need to study this relationship between trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. On the other hand, we have Franck Laroux, who's the special rapporteur on freedom of expression, who says 3-4 basic things that I think are interesting here, which is hate speech may be restricted to protect the rights of affected communities. In the context of pornography as well. So against national and racial and religious hatred. States often restrict, and this is the other side of this very interesting issue, going back to the map I showed you at the beginning. States often restrict the internet content without a legal basis, and several countries in the world do it. And they create these restrictions based on these broad, unspecific, ambiguous laws, and ambiguous and unspecific definitions of pornography, which really don't have this so-called adequate and proportional justification, which is usually what is asked for in human rights. So there's ability, also there's this, he mentions again the availability of these filters, like the V-chip we were mentioning, software filters to parents and schools to control children's access to certain content. And so what he says is basically the government should only block things this is what I interpret as his explanation in his report. In the case, it's very it's unnecessary that the government actually intervenes, so he finds it very hard to justify that the government should actually take action on this. If we can do it, parents can do it, and schools can do it. He basically says it should not. He considers it doesn't really have a very good justification. Okay, so that was the legal part. I'm sorry if it was very technical, but I wanted to make you, give you this idea of all these years of development of these common resolutions and these things that have been happening in Europe. So I'm going to use the USA as an example because this is really where I found a lot of things that are interesting for the way I'm trying to go and to look into my dissertation. So we're going to look at impact on college and work. These are several different studies on several different authors. I looked at Hannah Rosen, The End of Men and the Rise of Women, Michael Kimmel's book regarding Men Confront Pornography, and all these other different authors more on the area of sociology that basically gave me an idea of what the different scenarios pornography plays out in, let's say. Or not, then we can debate that. This is the idea. So the example of Title IX. So there was this Yale lawsuit apparently over here in the United States. It was considered. It was in the realm of the discrimination, of discrimination in education. There were women. I think it had to do with the fraternity phrase that was used, and there was someone that decided that this was not acceptable. So that was very interesting from a legal perspective to see that this had happened quite in a college setting. So Hannah Rosen uses this self-description of a young woman's dating style. So when she's talking to her in the book or interviewing her, and the girl describes herself as a hunter and a killer, and sort of she's studying business in an Ivy League business school, and she mimics her business negotiation techniques in her dating life, which, well, at least this is how Hannah Rosen describes her. I think she also, on the other hand, talks about men as losing their footing. They're trapped in fraternity land, and of course Michael Kimmel has written about this as well. She quotes Michael Kimmel in her book several times when referring to fraternities. The social intensity syndrome is referred to as well. So this sort of overload with pornography and video games, making men in what she describes as inept when for full-blown relationships and sort of human connections, and which include romance. Their sort of brains are rewired or transformed in such a way that they are not so useful for the purpose of romantic involvement. So this was an example of the college situation. And then she talks about the transfer of this kind of porn culture, let's say, into the workplace. So she talks about how women that have come out from these Ivy League business schools, and I must stress that she talks about a lot about Ivy League business schools and Ivy League universities. So she has kind of a vision that focuses a lot on that. They say that she has reports from women saying that they were in these finance jobs sitting after the weekend and men exchanging pictures of their sexual escapades, and the women either having to put up with or becoming one of the boys, sort of either reacting, repressing it, or sort of doing what they do. So she talks about the sort of reaction from women. So, and then she talks about these effects, so collateral effects, and then also we should also question, I think, are they effects or causes of the porn culture, and not only in work but in college. And Rosen speaks specifically of erotic capital and beauty premium. So the way she says women are now basically using their sexuality to get ahead. I have some thoughts on this, but we can debate this later. So she speaks, and that now men are kind of trying to catch up on these beauty traits that apparently she considers women are capitalizing on. So men are like desperately trying to catch up. This is what she says. And once again, talking as well about the fraternities, she noticed the active promotion of porn in college, the use in the dorms, the fact that men see this as an unquestionable right, and also the reinforcement of gender and racist stereotypes, which are already embedded in our society, and also Michael Kimmel speaks about this on other occasions. So basically on pop culture, before, and I will explain this, in the 1970s, so the anti-porn feminists from the 1970s said specifically the pornography culture was taking over their bodies, their lives, their movement, and there was a very strong movement here, unlike I don't know many others in the world that had this very strong movement against pornography. But what is now being said by several different authors and studies is, in fact, contemporary porn focuses relentlessly on women's bodies. It kind of decontextualizes sexual behavior, depicts women in degrading ways. We have the American Psychological Association saying that sexualized representations of girls and women can encourage their perception as sexual objects. And of course, TV, internet, and advertisements, they spread these artificially perfected images of female bodies. That perpetuate male entitlement, so through these misogynistic images. Also, there are a lot of kids that have been exposed to online porn and accidentally. I was referring to this before. There's also verbal abuse in certain songs. So some authors, this is Anika Ruthman in particular, that refers that there's, I believe, Dimes as well. I can give you the names of the authors in the end. They say that there's this verbal abuse that's clear in certain pop songs, that this doesn't help solidify racial and gender stereotypes. And one of them even asks, where's the limit to freedom of expression? So degradation through pop songs can be considered, is it transgressing it? And she actually asks if we should limit broadcasts somehow. So there are three examples of different studies regarding this impact on pop culture and the exposure to sexual content in general. So some boys and girls around 14 consider that as acceptable, especially there's a relation between boys considering it acceptable to force a girl to have sex, and this study in Canada established their frequent consumption of pornography as a relation. The USA has similar conclusions regarding in the context of sexual harassment. Boys and girls between 11 to 16 have been more exposed to pornographic films and carry out this kind of harassment more easily. And Italy, also over in Europe, we have associations between adolescents who use porn and sexual harassment and forcing people into sex. Again, the history, as I was talking about before, there's this clear difference when the porn movement, anti-porn movement started between what pornography was and what pop culture was. So you would go to get a magazine in a store, you would go and get a video, you would go to a porn theater, so you would go to a specific place to use porn, or to purchase porn. And so of course Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon are both two of the, you have to mention their names because they're two of the people that and Catherine McKinnon particularly from a legal perspective has fought against this for a long time. So they also mix the patriarchy with corporate, which is very interesting, so women being treated as commodities. So nowadays what we look at as in America in specific is this pornographication of pop culture. So this is like a fairly new word. There's a lot of talk about being pornified and pornographication. And the technology and communication really create these ways of exchanging and developing porn. And of course, this study, it's essentially, I think Michael Flood, large numbers of people, especially boys, are in contact with this sexually explicit media. Again, specifically regarding youth, there are growing numbers of children. This is the study that I think is one of the studies that I think is most that really had most impact on me. In New Zealand, there seems to be an increasing number of adolescents who are caught with child pornography. So adolescents between 15 and 19 are the largest group of child porn traders on the internet. I found this really strange, and I just found it really, I don't know if other countries are doing similar studies, but it would be interesting probably to have a study specifically regarding this. So basically people see things on the internet, they are disgusted by them, so there is not necessarily a positive reaction to what they see. There is also other contentious issues around this. There are also differences in reaction with kids' age and with kids' genders, according to Michael Flood's studies that he presents in the several material he writes. And basically there are age differences, like young kids don't really remember when they've been exposed to pornography, they don't really talk about it, while others that are slightly older, they reveal more disturbance when having seen it. And girls seem to be more affected by this explicit imagery than boys. So men more excited and females tendentially more disgusted. But these are only, I mean, this is tendentially, let's focus as well on the sort of the tendency because these are different kinds of studies, of course. And also boys are seen to react more positively to websites with explicitly sexually material, sort of sexually explicit material. And girls do see it as demeaning to females, so in certain studies. There are about 5 Swedish studies on youth. I'm not going to go through all of them in a very detailed way because I think we need also some space for debate. But I thought it was interesting that female partners of young male regular porn viewers are also more likely to engage in different types of intercourse. Here they refer anal sex and different kinds of sex, so they have a more, let's say, more variety and a different kind of sexual intercourse. Also, there's greater acceptance of non-marital, extramarital sex due to exposure to pornography, but also greater sexual knowledge, so about menstruation and other issues. Again, through television, there's also a study that says that people become more accepting of recreational sex, and there's a stronger belief between young people that their peers are sexually active, so they kind of look at this from what are my friends doing, and is this what they're doing, you know, kind of reaction. And the experimental studies on that both sexes are more supportive and less offended with this explicit sexual content when they're exposed to large amounts of it. I thought there was another interesting thing here regarding, I believe it also makes people sort of more open to things like group sex and other different types of sexual setups. So basically, from what we call ethics, I put the word ethics because I really think it's probably the best way to try to explain the connection between sexual education and pornography. Though not necessarily this is the best word to describe it, but this is the idea that I want to kind of also explain. Young people are sexual beings, so they can't be barred from sexual education. They need to be informed. And also, barring sexual education and sex from young people also makes them vulnerable to sexual abuse and other issues and emotional and health problems. So these are studies also that show that these situations need to be fought against, let's say. So there's a difference between children being harmed sexually and restricting access to their own sexuality. So they are sexual beings, they need to develop, and they need to basically, this needs to be dealt with, and from my point of view, from what I've been looking at, because of some of this porn that in fact eroticizes violence, and most of it can be considered sexist according to certain studies. So, and it can be considered a bad sex education instrument because apparently it's being used by young people to educate themselves on sex in general. So, and this is why basically it's said that it's bad in the sense bad sexual education instruments. It ignores intimate involvement, portrays sex in an unrealistic way, etc. Okay, so basically, so there are different factors that influence the result of the exposure to pornography. The type and frequency of viewing, the age and characteristics of viewers, even the research on adults that indicates the lack of sexual intimacy, sex addiction, and infidelity, whether real or perceived are consequences of the use of pornography. So it's not necessarily, some people say, some authors, it's not necessarily sexually liberating. It basically perpetuates inequality and sexualizes. And the counter-arguments to this is that in fact sexually explicit media can have positive effects on young people and kids. It may not influence the entirety of one's sexual experience or expression. Its consumption may be a part of this broader sexual experience. And it can teach sexual knowledge in an educational way and to really counteract repression be sex positive, and I think we should talk about this at the end, the sex positive aspect of it. For example, pro-same sexuality pornography is when it comes to online pornography, is probably a way to access things that are not in the realm of possibilities, of normal possibilities. And very briefly on politics, because I'm going to finish very soon, there's all these different movements in the United States. This is what several authors talk about, the radical left, and how the radical left has kind of moved away from its initial intent on pornography, which is really to go into oppression and try to get women out of it. And they say that's not the case today anymore. That political movements in America are in the hands of sexists, there's these different, who continue to use porn, and that they believe that this freedom of expression issue that is always used to counteract any sort of regulation on pornography, they're doing it like in their favor. So there's all these contentious issues in politics. I just wanted to give you this kind of political realm of what radical left, what people call the radical left. Some say they're anti-feminist, and in reality they're not really they're doing a disservice of what the radical left should be. There's this fight against censorship that they think it's used in a sort of for personal gain or personal use, let's say. And so basically, on the other hand, we also have authors, Russ Irvin Funk, that talk about, and other authors that talk about their exposure to pornography and how they were growing up with pornography. Barker, I think, is another one, that talk about how they would have liked to have been protected from certain things from the porn culture, and how they weren't. So there's also men that talk about these different, let's say, political perspectives, the context that they were growing up in, and what happened in their fraternities, in their universities, in their workplaces. Of course, what is considered, and this is a very contentious issue that you might want to talk about later, but what is considered transgression and sexual dissidence for some is oppression for others. So this is the major problem when you're trying to define a law on pornography, is this: what is transgression, what is obscene, what is violent, what is not violent, what is oppression, what is not oppression. So some men have joined women in this feminist activism, so sort of anti-pornography, that basically think there's the need to critique how the pornography is shaping men's sexuality. And we have men that have been supporting, obviously, this feminist activism since the 70s, which I've mentioned. So Michael Kimmel has talked about this in Men Confront Pornography. And so they basically say that we need a new sort of feminist, anti-pornography, radical left. Some authors say this. And they say porn humanizes men as much as women. And hence the masculinities aspect of this seminar. So the next steps, really, I'm kind of left with these questions. I don't know if you probably have similar or different questions to ask, but is there a need, and is it admissible to further regulate the consumption of adult pornography on one hand? How do you strike a balance between this right of freedom of expression and your private life and the regulation of adult pornography? And finally, how do you regulate the access of youth through new technologies without stifling, let's say, their sexual selves or their sexual development? So I think these are kind of the questions I'm at the moment. I just wanted to leave you with this wonderful phrase from Michael Kimmel and Kaufman. I want a world which encourages both women and men to explore erotic possibilities. I want a world where pictures of naked bodies and sex can be pleasurable. Not, pleasurable, hot, funny, and mutual, and where sex isn't about abuse. So I think that's really the background of what I'm trying to go, the path I'm trying to go down in this dissertation. I just wanted to show you some things images I've been collecting through the different museums I've been visiting, and this is a real doll. So it's this updated version of what is an inflatable doll. They're actually getting more and more developed. There's this new version of them. They're actually warm. They answer to touch, and they actually react to touch. So this is what we call the real dolls, but there are other versions, more updated versions. These are some sex guides from 1977, which I thought were really interesting. The one I found the most charismatic of the three was the one that says masturbating with style. So there's a sort of mix of pornographic images with sex education. So apparently there's always been there. This is always. So it explains, how to do oral sex and how to masturbate, and I thought it was really interesting. This is a dress entirely made out of condoms, which I thought was really out of the box. This is a shoe that's supposed to be a fetishist kind of shoe. It's impossible to walk in it. It looks a bit painful. I don't know if you agree with me. But this is Hugh Hefner's dressing gown, which I thought was very interesting, a little curiosity. It's also in one of the museums I visited. This was in another museum, and you can't read it very well probably. It says, "The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas." So it was actually a play or some sort of a show with Dolly Parton, where it's kind of very explicit, language referring to this. This is the future, I believe, and probably some people here will be able to explain in more detail. This is a virtual reality doll. I'll just show you the images. She kind of moves around. She's a sort of Twilight. She's like a vampire. I saw this in an exposition, and someone is wearing a virtual mask and controlling her in the air, let's say. So she moves around. You can see her on the screen. She's tied up. She's not a real person, obviously. She has all these sort of tattoos and vampiresque kind of look, and all in sort of this leather bikini. And the person is kind of controlling her through the virtual mask. So I'm kind of trying to look at the future. Even though I'm writing about pornography per se, I'm looking into the future a bit. And this is entirely virtual reality. So nobody's touching anybody. Nobody's interacting with any object. This is virtual. And the person can actually physically have sex in the air, let's say, without actually... So this is the proportions of the doll and the style of the doll and the look on the doll also was quite impressive to me, because she looks quite, I don't know if she's taking off these new trends that we see nowadays. This was a very famous sex tape, Tommy Lee and Pamela Anderson. This was inadvertently given out by their gardener. Apparently, according to the things I read, this was leaked, really, in the sense that at the time it was I'd say one of the first things you've heard in the United States about this. I thought this was interesting as well. A California gigolo, every woman's dream and every man's fantasy. This is a book or a movie. And then, of course, the political take on this, which I think is very interesting. Also, so I don't know if you can see, but basically this is in a museum, and they're making a parody about Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton and her, and the situation with Monica Lewinsky. And finally, I think this must be a very recent addition to the museum I was in, which is Donald Trump with a question mark, dressed in a very particular way. So basically, I just wanted to show you more of the political aspects of how porn is used, and has always been used as well to critique politically. Okay, so basically this is it. I'm sorry if it was a bit long, but I just wanted to make sure you had all the elements that you needed from a legal and sociological perspective. And I would love to hear your input on where you think things could go from here in my dissertation. And if you have anything you would like to share or ask as well, would be very interested.
Okay, I'll start. So thank you very much for your talk. I think, at least for me, it was very nice to hear somebody who has an expertise in law explain these conventions and treaties and all this stuff that I find very difficult to tease out. So that was really helpful, and I think it's such a strength to your argument that you are able to do that. And this is a very minor question. At the beginning of your talk, you had made a statement about the difference between children pornography and adult pornography, and the issue of consent around children. I'm interested to know, one, if you're going to go further with that in your thesis, and then also just what your thoughts are about that. And I'll preface it in just saying that it's contentious, as you know from the literature, when this age of consent actually is. And I've read very little on pornography, but I've read a lot on sex work. So a lot of sex positive writings would argue that like a 17-year-old girl or woman, whatever phrase you want to, or however you want to identify them, may have the ability to consent, right? So where are you in that argument?
Well, I mean, the consent, when I talk about consent, I'm thinking about, of course, a legal perspective. So
Right.
when you study law, when you study children in law, you know that children are not legally capable of consenting by themselves. So it's more of a legal perspective. So it's also the consent that we're thinking about from a sociological perspective, obviously. But I am going to look into it because I think consent is very essential for many of these different areas, not only for pornography, but also for sex work, for other issues. So what is true consent? What is a free choice? The ages vary. So, and also in the EU, I think they slightly vary. The age of what we call the majority or sexual majority. So there are like 2 different ages in Portugal, like 16 and 18, and so you can only do certain things at 16, and then others you can do them at 18, and with the permission of your parents in some cases at 16. At least it used to be like that. I have to go and look specifically at Portugal. But what I think is really the fact that the law uses these terms, to me, is disturbing, I must say, because when you talk about, say, child prostitute, you're thinking about someone that's not able to consent, that doesn't know, that is not at a stage of development that can even, make a decision like that. So, and the same for child pornography. I mean, I think it should be substituted by sort of child rape and sexual abuse on film or off film. This is really what it is. While when we're talking about adults, and I think this young people and this youth aspect, that's the transition from childhood to adulthood, is really it's essential, not only for people that get caught up in these situations, but also for people that are consuming it and accessing it. And on one hand, they need informed consent, and you were talking about the sex positive aspect, which is also important. But there has to be some sort of porn conversation in people growing up that needs to be included in let's say, sex ed or families, or so that there are some porn directors that are feminist and that are sex positive, and that have developed, one in particular has developed a handbook to talk about pornography to children. Her name is Erika Lust, she's Swedish, and she basically has developed this with psychologists, sort of how do you have a porn conversation with your 11-year-old or so she has the different ages and age-appropriate conversations of how to sort of start it or talk about it if the child or the adolescent brings it up. So yes, I mean, consent, this is why I don't like the legal terms, because it sounds like they're consenting to it. Oh, this is child pornography. Oh, this is a child prostitute. No, it's not. It's a child that's sexually exploited and abused, and it's a child that's sexually exploited and abused on camera. There's absolutely no going around it. What I thought was interesting in the legal evolution is that, in fact, it begins to take small steps, everybody together, kind of, in the EU, slowly but surely, sort of including these new concepts and talking about adult pornography. And that's what struck an interesting thing for me. I thought, why are they mentioning adult pornography? They're not defining what adult pornography is. So it's the lack of definition of adult pornography that actually intrigued me. So children pornography and pornography portraying children, let's say, and pornography with adults is something that's kind of, particularly the adult part, a bit undefined. But I don't know if that answers your question more or less. Any other questions? More comments?
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm always struck by how protect women, protect women, protect women.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, how about protecting men?
Men.
It's like,
Exactly.
It's like my brothers, God only knows how they felt about all this stuff. And the pressure put on them to
Mhm.
behave in ways that they didn't feel comfortable behaving. I mean, they grew up with moms and sisters and pets that were females, and they loved them. And then all of a sudden, they hit this wall called, oh, now I'm an adolescent, I'm going to be an adult, and I have to now be hyper-masculine. I had to be miserable for them. I've never talked with them about it. But it's terrifying to me to do
Mhm.
this to you. But we're saying about men, and that this is what men are. And now other young boys have to become like this, or you don't quite make it as a man unless you're willing to do this sort of stuff. And where's the emotional content called LOVE, you know, that sort of stuff?
Yeah,
It's
this
very damaging, it seems to me, so it must be horrifying for them.
Yes.
I don't read a lot of sympathy about that.
Mhm.
It's always protect the
Women.
girls, protect
Mhm.
the women, protect.
But this is the idea that, I mean, my vision for the future is that, in fact, pornography, I think when we look at the countries that ban pornography and you look at the statistics of what actually happens when they ban it, it actually goes up. So, and it's really not the way to go. And at least from my legal perspective, it's really doesn't have the positive results people are looking for. But not only does current pornography damage men and their sexual vision of women and their relationships, but also, of course, damages women that are living with those men. So but in fact, the focus is really women, children, women and children, women and children.
And the children
yeah.
who are living with those men are
Yes,
damaged.
and then they get
By
they
watching
get
these men be, you know,
exactly. But this feminist pornography that's now being created actually is trying to break with these this very sexist pornography and this violent pornography and degrading. It's degrading for women, but it's degrading for men as well. I watched a play the other day called Mope. Mope is a man in pornography that's basically used as backup. He's sort of there physically to be used, his penis is to be used, you know, sort of in a group of penises, or so he's just like the decharacterized person. So men also are objectified, and men are also, as you said, and I believe rightly so, that in fact they deconnect with love, and because these are the examples. This is part of their sex ed, and so feminist porn, as far as what I've seen so far, creates different like body types. There's stories that are created by women to start with. So they're actually directors that ask women to send them their fantasies and put them into film. They have different body types, different sexual setups. It's just created in a completely different way. And it's not erotica, as we distinguished the beginning of the seminar. It's porn. It's very sexually explicit. You see everything. So, but it's in a story. It's like in a story with different people, with different nationalities, with different physical body types. So kind of, I think the way forward is, in fact, trying to substitute, let's say, what we've been seeing that's not very good. And many women are not interested in pornography precisely because it is not appealing to them. If you watch, I mean, I never even watched it that much, but if you watch it a bit, you'll realize I think many women are not interested in it because it's not appealing to them. And these new feminist pornography directors are picking up on this sort of lack of interest and creating also a new market, obviously. We always have to think about the industry and how the industry profits from these actors and actresses and these very young people, usually very young people. But there is obviously a path into pornography and there is a path into prostitution. It's being studied. Nevertheless, I mean, people have a choice to do whatever they want with their lives, but they have been the path you get, that like how you get there psychologically, physically, what has happened to you in your life. You know, there are a lot of studies that show people go down a certain path but ultimately it's their choice. But it's also our choice what we watch, you know, and what we choose to watch and what we choose to fill our sexual fantasies with, let's say.
It's so, if speaking from the United States perspective, it's so difficult to regulate it because especially the politicians now, but even the ones moving forward, porn now has become such a deeply ingrained part of our society that it's really hard to tease it out. And so then you find the people who are anti-porn, against porn in politics, are often right in politics. Often come from the Christian religious background, right, which is where a lot of our clashes come from in the United States politically, and then you get into all of that. I mean, but when you have white, affluent men in charge who were raised watching, well, or at least reading the magazines, and then the next generation will be having watched it online, it's very difficult to tease it out.
Yeah. I mean, I think the way forward, I mean, you do see things in other realms, certain problems diminish. I'm thinking in Portugal, actually, as an example. We legalized the consumption of drugs, and even hard drugs, but it's only to a certain extent. So if you're caught with you have X amount, you'll presume to be trafficking it. So obviously, that is not legal. But it has gone down drastically, the actual drug consumption. So I don't know if you can draw a parallel, but it is a good example of how decriminalization, let's say, can lead to ways forward. Like if you want to really catch the bad guys, pushing things underground a bit more, making them really extreme, like this is anti-porn and this is pro-sex in any possible way, you know. Sort of somewhere in the middle, I think the balance is somewhere in the middle. How to find that balance? Then we have all these contentious issues, which is what is violence, what is obscenity. BDSM practitioners, Catherine McKenna's definition of pornography from 1983 says to tying someone up is violence. But you go and tell that to a BDSM practitioner nowadays, someone that practices BDSM, that being tied up, you're being the victim of violence. They'll say, no, this is my choice. I consent to this. We have rules. You know, how do you approach this without sort of being moralistic, which is a major no-no in my perspective. You know, how do you do it in a most impartial way possible? Let's say it's very hard, and things are very extreme in the United States, and you do see these things. I mean, I thought it was hilarious that in the Erotic Heritage Museum that I visited, like one of the first things when I walked in was Donald Trump, you know, dressed in one of these penis Halloween suits. So there's a very intricate relation between sex scandals, politics, pornography, and then is pornography the problem? We live in a patriarchal society, so pornography is just, you know, misogynistic pornography is a branch of that. I see it and also in a very global way, kind of.
I think you should keep in mind, though, that the sexualization, the sex stuff that's going on with this president is nothing like I've ever seen with any other president. I mean, we looked at Bill Clinton as careless about sex and exploiting his wife, but we didn't have images of him running around in a penis suit until recently, maybe. And now we've got it all over the place with this president. I mean, it's almost like even we are using sex now as a weapon against him.
Yep.
Nothing else is working. Let's try that.
You're reminding me of the very early texts I saw in France. It was used to criticize the Catholic Church. So they would put priests in very compromising. Well, describe them in very compromising, or depict them, draw them. You know, so it was always a way to also do political satire. Really, it's to ridicularize them. So there is a function for let's say the sexual element. It's always been used. But, I mean, I think this is proof that everything's intertwined, really.
And I suspect that these images of the wife of the so-called president in hardly dressed.
Yes.
It seems to me that that's a bullet shot towards him, not towards her.
Yeah. I
mean, like, he's married to that, whatever she is, this naked, gorgeous body. Who is he? It's really... I mean, we're not saying nice things about her, but the attack is on him. When we look, and I guess we've all seen them, right? They're all over Facebook. You can't miss it. what she looks like with no clothes on.
Yes. I think we all do by
I
this
don't go out of
point.
my way to find them.
It's
I
hard
just
to
go
avoid
all
it.
the way. It's hard to avoid them. And now there are some images of him showing up without clothes on like that.
I don't know this.
There was a statue.
I'm gonna try very hard not to see that.
Yes.
It was, I was like, this is our president, this is what we're doing. Isn't there some political angle that would straighten him out? No, you gotta go through the sexual angle to straighten this guy out.
Well, satire, I mean,
Well, the statue
yeah.
was just, it was shocking to me.
Yeah.
I'm not puny, I'm not judgmental about it. It's just sort of like, that's what you have to do to control this guy? It's like,
It's a form of satire. I think obviously if that is any form that is repressed, it's also a bad thing in the sense that I was just remembering, Charlie Hebdo, the satirical magazine in France that got attacked, and the Charlie Hebdo attacks. They are famous for doing sexual. I mean, it's all in cartoons, but it's doing some very sexual, sort of very naked people with sort of oversized breasts and this kind of thing, and they're famous for it. So, and it's highly confrontational, and it's I think it's probably an essential form of freedom of expression. What is not normal to me is in fact not practicing, what is in the law, let's say, or what is, and necessarily the law is not necessarily always the best practice. So, but I was just thinking the difference between the president and his behavior and his what they say, what the government actually says, sort of grab that pussy versus, oh, porn is very bad,
well, there's stuff, I mean, I think you could label a lot of these
Yeah.
sexual attacks on the president as porn. I mean, I went to the Women's March in Washington, and 99% of the stuff wasn't pornographic. But every once in a while, they'd go by, and I would say, that looks like porn to me. I just, like, keep your tiny hands off of my, everybody knows what that means now,
Yeah.
right? Off of my whatever. And the whatever was something like my rights to make choices about birth control. I mean, it didn't even have to have anything sexual in that. But keep your tiny hands off my rights to breathe air, or whatever, and it was so highly pornographic to me, and sexual. I mean, and there was people walking on the streets carrying these kinds of signs, and I thought, we could attack this guy for the real reasons, but we're using this back door. It's very effective, I would guess. I can't imagine him psychologically surviving these kinds of sexual attacks.
Well, I think it also lends itself to a lot of sociology, especially about masculinity. It's in how the popular culture is using ideas of what it is to be a man, or what an appropriate body would be, and body shaming. And I think it allows us to have a larger discussion about what's going on in terms of gender and sexual orientation, and how the public is responding to trauma. I mean, there were some people that were very, very offended by those commentaries and on signs.
Well, a lot of us would be delighted if he had a big-time mental breakdown and had to leave office. Keep hitting him. The guy's 70 years old. I'm sure he's not as sexually functional as he was 20 years ago, let alone 40 years ago. I mean, most 70-year-old men are kind of quiet about these things. We're pounding on him. Hey, that's one way of getting rid of him. Let him have his nervous breakdown, his mental breakdown. I just hit him in any way you can. That's how I feel about it. And do we really, is it okay to let your best friend sit next to you and make sexual jokes about him? That then he puts on the internet or on Facebook. And just
Maybe this is also the internet culture, because we no longer have patience and time to focus on the real argument.
Yeah,
We want
right.
something catchy,
And do it now.
a picture, a slogan,
Yeah.
something funny.
Yeah. And we want it today.
Yeah.
And it's effective. It's a silver bullet. And then there are all these rumors about how his wife is hiding out in their apartment, not doing. Hey, if I had a husband who was that socially dysfunctional, I think maybe I wouldn't come out in public either.
Yeah. The attacks on the family are not okay, in my opinion. I mean, he's the object, he is the political, I mean, of course she's First Lady, but he is the person in office. He is the one that has to be transparent. And he is the one that has to be accountable. And he's the one that has to practice what he preaches. He is the main protagonist of this situation. So, and if he's saying things like grab them by the pussy, he needs to be, you know, and made accountable on all these different levels, on a corporate level, in his businesses, or all these different.
Well, we love the idea that she might be hiding out, because we blame him.
Mm-hmm.
We're not blamed, but she's not the target, he's the target.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a wife who won't even come out in public.
Like-
Wow, what's wrong with this man,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
Lots of things. And eventually you get down to the fact that he doesn't want to support healthcare for everybody, you know?
Yeah.
You know,
And
so-
is doing much more serious things than just the
Yeah,
sort of
right.
the soap opera with the wife, yeah. Well, yes, I mean, the Bill Clinton and the Hillary Clinton and the Monica Lewinsky is also a good example of how people get caught up in the
You know,
theatrics of sex.
Well, it sort of opened the door, I think, historically. We now know for sure that John Kennedy did at least as much as Bill as Bill
Mhm.
Clinton. At least, you know. Apparently, he was quite a womanizer. And I mean, I was a young kid during that time.